So I will try to make this brief para meron tayong enough time for questions, for clarifications, kung ano man yung mga natitira niyo pa mga tanong the entire day. We can also start talking about collaborations and all of that. So yung yung presentation ko, the first half of this would be more or less a summary of what has been said the entire day. And then I will try to question or interrogate some of our values, context, concepts, and practices para meron tayong pag-iisipan when we go home, pag naghiwa-hiwalay na tayo. So this will be focusing on the researcher and the community. So simulan natin dun sa mga wika sa Pilipinas. Earlier this morning, nabanggit na rin nito ni Ria, na batay dun sa ethnologue, ito yung numbers na meron tayo. We have 186 na languages that are extinct. So you have 184 living languages, and you have 175 na indigenous na mga wika. Dun sa mga indigenous na wika, 34 dito yung in trouble at 11 yung dying. Yung ethnologue, hindi lang naman ito yung list ng mga wika sa Pilipinas. No? Hindi lang ito yung tanging talaan. If you look at yung other institutions like KWF, for example, may ibang list yung KWF na batay dun sa kanilang atlas. If you look at ibang mga researchers, may mga kanya-kanya din silang list. Si Constantino, back in the late 90s, early 2000, ang listahan niya is around 110 languages. If you look at yung work ni Natrayon sa Comparative Australian Dictionary, meron mga 150 Philippine languages. So this is the first problem. Hindi natin alam kung ilang wika meron tayo. So we don't have a big picture. And until makagawa tayo ng systematic na dialectological survey of the entire country, of the entire Philippines, hindi natin mas tutukoy siguro kung ilan yung wika natin, hindi natin matutukoy din yung depth of multilingualism dun sa iba't ibang mga communities. And hindi rin natin masisiguro kung ilan dito yung mga endangered na mga wika. But for now, we have these lists to work with. Now, ngayon, dahil yung workshop naman natin ay nasa context ng endangered na languages, yung mga nanganganib na wika, maganda rin sigurong tingnan yung popular narrative about language endangerment sa Pilipinas. It's quite unfortunate na it's simplified to this picture, yung kwento ng endangerment ng wika sa Pilipinas. It's as if na meron kang sa pula sa puti. It's that type of narrative where you have one language against another, where we pit one language against another. So parang sabong ito. And this, naandun pa rin tayo din sa the myth of the killer language. Noong 80s at noong 90s, yung kalaban natin dito yung English. Yung titingnan natin na killer language because of the globalization and all of that. And then somehow, if you look at yung mga conversations sa social media, ngayon ang kalaban naman natin, ang pinagsasabong natin ay yung Tagalog or Filipino or whatever call it, and yung iba pang mga wika sa Pilipinas na kasalanan ng Filipino, kasalanan ng Tagalog kung bakit namamatay yung mga wika sa Pilipinas. But I think this is quite lazy and rather simplistic na pagtingin dun sa mga bagay-bagay. It's also an easy way out dun sa when you abstract certain things. Diba? Parang kasalanan ito ng Tagalog, so it's one language over the other. So it's easier to deal with than to have to face yung what I think are the causes of endangerment ng mga wika natin dito sa Pilipinas. At batay din sa isang preparation unit ko, these are some of the identified na causes nung endangerment ng mga wika natin. One is yung multi-colonial experience. Okay? Mahaba yung dinaanan nating proseso dun sa kolonisasyon. And this created yung mga pinag-uusapan natin kanina ng mga certain attitudes towards language. This colonial experience facilitated that. So now you have languages that are aspirational, languages that will allow you to be socially mobile. So nagkaroon ka ng hierarchy sa language, nagkaroon ka ng devaluation of some of our linguistic identities. Kaya hanggang ngayon pinag-aawayan para natin yung language at yung dialect. There's also a lot of political and socio-cultural linguicide. There's also displacement of communities that's happening. Displacement brought about by militarization in the countryside and yung mga intrusive na mga multinational companies. So nabubuwag yung language communities dun sa kanayunan because of these things. And of course, extreme poverty. So it's easier to blame something on another language than it is to say na sandali, yung ang problema natin dito ay yung pinagbobomba natin yung mga luma. Walang problema natin dito like 3 days or 4 days ago, pinagbabaril yung tirahan ng 15 tumandok families. So, I think mas madali yung kasalanan ng Tagalog. Kasalanan ito ng isa pang wika. So, as I was saying, it's yung popular narrative is rather simplistic and lazy. Kasi makikita natin yung causes of endangerment are kawing-kawing at intermingled yung mga causes na ito. So kung titingnan natin, yung language shift, it's a symptom and also a result of lahat nitong mga causes na ito dito sa Pilipinas. It leads the speakers to devalue their language and eventually abandon yung linguistic identity nila in favor of another language. So they shift to a language that they think, places a higher rung dun sa ginawa rin nating hierarchy ng mga wika o ng mga wika. So really, if you look at it that way, yung story of language endangerment, yung mga nanganganib na wika sa Pilipinas, it's really a story of oppression. Now, mahalaga itong context na to kasi ano yung dadalhin nito dun sa ating gawain na documentation. Okay, so paano natin ito? How do we deal with that? If documentation is not the solution, then how do we deal with itong endangerment? Kasi somehow meron tayo itong romantic or imagined na idea na documentation is a solution. So when we talk about documentation, ang una tayo siguro, why? Why are we documenting? Why are you documenting these languages? Bakit? Marami iba't ibang dahilan. At I won't be all judged and all of that. Pero valid naman yung iba't ibang dahilan. Some of us do this for school. Kasi kailangan mo ng thesis topic. Or kailangan mo mag-publish isang journal article, and since uso ngayon yung documentation, then that's one thing that you want to do para mas madali. Or kailangan mo ma-promote, or whatever reason it is. So iba-iba naman yung dahilan. Pero mahalaga na malaman natin sa sarili natin kung ano yung dahilan kung bakit natin ito ginagawa. Kasi that will also inform us kung ano yung klaseng or what do we want to document, really. At kung para kanino yung documentation na itong ginagawa natin. If you look at yung literature dun sa linguistics, diba? Before we call them informants, and now more or less ang tawag mo dun ay collaborators dun sa mga informants mo. But I think it also depends on what type of work you're doing. Some work, baka informant yung kailangan mo or consultant. Some work are collaborators talaga. Yung yung kailangan mo. Pero to loosely say na these people are language collaborators when in fact they didn't have anything to, they were not included in um, the design of everything. That may be problematic then. So lately, we've been talking about community-based na documentation. And I think malinaw na napakita naman dun sa ginawa ni na Poy, ginagawa ni na Rinch at ni na Manny, kung anong ibig sabihin itong community-based na documentation. I just want to share this with you kasi I saw this in one of yung grupo namin ng mga naandito sa type of work na to, and I thought it resonated well with me. So translate ko siya in Filipino. This was written in 1996 by Little Bear. He is a Sheyan na linguist, language activist. Kasi it talks to us about yung ano ba talaga itong ginagawa natin dito sa documentation. So he goes, this is my translation na lang. So kung medyo hindi elegant yung Philip translation, pasensya nyo na. So sabi, kailangan nating pag-aralan ang mga wika para hindi ito mamatay. So ginawa ito pero patuloy pa rin na namamatay yung mga wika. So sumunod, gumawa tayo ng mga diksyonaryo. Kinilekta natin yung mga salita pero patuloy pa rin na namamatay yung mga wika. Kailangan natin pakadalubhasa sa mga wikang ito. And some of us actually did. Marami ang pakadalubhasa, subalit patuloy pa rin na namamatay yung wika. So makikita niyo lahat ng mga sayos ito ay at some point, or at this point, ginagawa natin. No? So hasain sa linguistics ang ilang mga guro sa pamilya. So yeah, we had people coming in to take their masters and PhDs in linguistics or do sa mga workshops ganyan. Pero still patuloy na namamatay yung mga wika. So ituro sa mga paaralan ang mga wika, lalo na sa elementarya. So pinilit natin itong gawin, despite yung kakulangan natin sa resources, may subalit patuloy pa rin na namamatay yung mga wika. Sabi, alam ko na, lumikha tayo ng mga gawang sining na pampasigla doon sa paggamit ng wika. Yung NCCA has a lot of projects related to this. At ginawa nga natin ito, pero patuloy na namamatay pa rin yung mga wika. So, kunan natin ng video yung mga katuturo habang nagsasalita, umaawit, tumutula sa kanilang wika. At napuno nga yung mga archive ng mga video, subalit patuloy pa rin yung pagkamatay ng mga wika. Again, I adapted this from Richard Little Bear, and this was also ginamit na ito ni Winnie Tanner in 2011 to refer to yung sa Mau, work naman on the Maori language. So patuloy na namatay yung wika despite all these efforts. Kasi the thing is, well, at least I think, that in a sense, yung documentation projects na ito are palliative measures. Okay? They don't really address yung actual cause ng endangerment ng mga wika. So it's like, you treat the fever pero hindi mo naman talaga ginagamot yung infection. So in a sense may ganun nangyayari. Palliative, parang pandalian, takip butas, pero we're not really addressing yung mga problems natin kung bakit patuloy na nanganganib yung mga wika. Our documentation projects, they do not address the vulnerability of of the communities that speak them. At yung social linguistic fragility that precipitates yung rapid decline of itong mga marginalized or minoritized or oppressed na mga indigenous groups. So yun, napuno yung hagawa tayo ng maraming theses at maraming napuno yung archives, pero still patuloy pa rin. So bakit kailangan natin i-rethink itong mga bagay-bagay na ito, no? Parang we might have to do that. Okay? And we might have to accept the fact that this type of work ay hindi pwedeng gawin mag-isa. So again, why are we documenting? What are we documenting and for whom? Why? And what? Para kanino? Well, you end nung documentation work is, again, a thesis or an article, then baka hindi dapat doon nagtatapos, no? yung trabaho. So now we go to the communities. That's when we go to the field, like field work kasi, iba't ibang grupo sa Pilipinas kasi the department naman will go dati, at least nung mga pre-pandemic, everybody goes to the field, and we go to the field during Christmas break, sem break, summer break. That's the time that we go to the field, and we have classes that we take students to the field para mag-field work, mangarap ng datos at makipamuhay din. One thing that we noticed dun sa mga fieldwork namin, fieldwork experiences, is that yung communities, marami sa kanila ang nakakaranas ng what we call research fatigue. Parang pagod na sila na maya't maya may pupunta mga researchers, kadalasan mga description nila, mga puti, pupunta doon, kapamisan tayo din, pupunta doon. And then we have our agenda, we go there for a few days, we have our agenda, we have our recitation materials, we get the data, and then we leave. So I think yung research fatigue comes from yung very extractive din na practice natin of fieldwork. At least yung lalo na yung dating practice ng fieldwork. It's extractive. It's also intrusive and at the same time disruptive. Parang can you imagine, halimbawa, sa bahay ninyo, may pupuntang, I don't know, 3-4 na tao. Tapos, mula pagising nyo na, andyan sila, tatanong-tanong. Diba? Matutulog ka na lang, may tinatanong pa rin. Hindi mo na magawa yung trabaho mo. Kasi it can be that it can be very intrusive and disruptive, no? Yung the process itself of gathering all this data. So saan papasok dun yung community at community based? Now, if it comes from the community, ano yung assessment ng community na kailangan nila, then magkakaroon yan ng realignment ng mga sino yung mga ganito, sino mga ganyan, paano papasok. So that would lessen din yung disruption, and that would also it will be less yung extractive in a sense. Okay. Pero paminsan, paano natin alam kung ano yung pangailangan ng community? Or is this what we think the community needs? So yung aspirations ba, yung mga pangarap ba natin ay pareho din dun sa naiisip ng community? Yung community is also not a monolithic na structure. Maraming iba't ibang miyembro din yung komunidad. So, paano ito? Gagawa ba tayo ng dictionary? Ito ba yung kailangan ng community? O ito yung na-suggest natin na kailangan nila? But then again, the structure of yung dictionary ay hindi naman, friendly dun sa paggamit ng community. Then it becomes a problem. It's something that has to be questioned, and we have to rethink these things. So minsan yung may na community based, minsan when you read articles, it says community based, and they call their partners mga collaborators, and all the collaborators are co-authors. Sometimes you have to carefully read din kung ano ba yung nilalaman nung work na yon. I was reading an article on, hindi ko sasabihin specifically kung ano. It's an article on one of the Aita languages, and community-based. Nandiyan yung mga collaborators as authors, and then nandiyan yung linguist as co-author. But when I was reading the article, it was about the diachronic phonology of the language. So, ano yung relevance dun sa community na sinasabi natin na endangered na? So that's something that we have to think about. Paano ba dapat ito bumabalik dun sa community din? Oftentimes when we talk about community, we're talking about the community of speakers. Okay, ito yung area kung saan kayo fieldwork, ito yung mga members ng iba't ibang ethno-linguistic groups o ng isang ethno-linguistic group dun sa area na pinupuntahan nyo. But sometimes, or I think it's also part of our trabaho na to think of multiple communities. At kasama na dyan yung community of researchers or community of linguists. Back in yung nagsisimula pa lang itong so enterprise, itong endangered languages and documentation, revitalization. Yun yung debate lagi ng mga linguists na working on endangered languages like sina Krauss at yung iba pa mga linguists like sina Ladefoged. Kasi ang sinasabi ni Ladefoged nung Krauss, parang we have to do this, we have to go to the field, we have to document these languages, we have to try to revitalize it, etc., etc. Ang point naman ni Ladefoged, it's a waste of time. Ang ginagawa dapat natin as linguists is, it's a scientific study of language, it's theorizing, and linguistics is not social work. So yun yung debate nila. Kasi kaya nga I think this also goes back to what Vinci was saying earlier, yung description or versus documentation. But I think that's also a colonial way of thinking of the binary of things. Very binary. I think we can do naman both. Di ba? You can answer to the community of researchers and linguists dun sa work mo. But at the same time, translate your work to reflect yung the needs of the community. It's not a either or thing. It's something that we have to do both, because we also have a responsibility to the community of researchers and and linguists. Kaya nga, you have to have also, if you're doing documentation, you also have to have the proper training. Otherwise, you're just being destructive for nothing. Kaya nga makikita ninyo yung rigor dun sa, I think Stina was saying yung sa mga metadata, makikita nyo yung kung gaano kabusisi yung documentation na ginagawa ni Narien sa SIL, naka-code lahat. Kasi we also have to be answerable to yung community of researchers and community of linguists. And at the same time, may responsibility din tayo dun sa mga community of advocates dito sa language rights. So these are the multiple communities that the researcher should consider. Yeah. Yung community of speakers, yung community of researchers, saka yung community of advocates. Para sa akin, hindi siya pwedeng ihiwa-hiwalay. Kasi pagka ganoon, then it becomes a disservice not only to the minoritized na group, but also to the discipline and to civil society. So kabit-kabit yun. So, katingin ko, every time we do documentation or every time we go to the field, whether we're doing documentation work or descriptive work, we always have to think of these things. Now, yung accountability, saka yung responsibility natin to our multiple communities. Kaya it also helps that you have the proper training and all of that. Kasi nga, fieldwork can be disruptive. But then, if we look at certain processes, well, indigenous methodologies, or if you're familiar with Pahikis and Kot. Kasi the way I see it, di ba sinasabi ko nga na yung fieldwork, lalo na yung practice natin o yung training na nakuha ng karamihan sa atin na educated in the West or were educated by teachers that were also educated in the West, yung fieldwork is very extractive. Kaya nga may research fatigue. We're also trained na to look at it, from a very detached na point of view. We have to be professional. At yung definition dun ng professional is that you have to, hindi ka dapat nakikisalamuha o nakikisangkot dun sa nangyayari sa lipunan. At we hide behind the bias of scientific objectivity, yung mga gano'n. So yun yung training din natin. It becomes exhaustive and extractive and disruptive. Pero if we look at yung nung 70s, yung sa psikolohiyang Pilipino, sina Santiago and Enriquez, may commentary o may critique na sila of this type of fieldwork. At isa sa mga tinukoy doon ni na Enriquez at Santiago ay yung tinawag ng levels of interaction or itong mga pakiki. Actually, hindi naman ito very discrete na levels. It's also something that we learned growing up. Natutunan natin ito sa ating households, yung paano, yung pakikitungo, yung pakikisalamuha, pakikilahok, etc., etc. So I think this can also be very useful para ma-lessen yung fatigue. So it depends on the type of study you're doing. These are level of of interaction. And dun sa documentation work, I think um, yung level of interaction that's appropriate or apt is yung pakikisangkot. Diba? You're part of the community, you're part of the community, pero you do not speak for the community, or you do not tell them that's good for them. Pero nakikisangkot ka dun sa community. And these things, alam naman natin to eh. Parang we do this all the time. Diba? If you separate yourself from yung researcher hat mo, this is what you do every day. This is what you do when you visit friends. This is what you do when you visit people. Diba? Lalo pa sa probinsya, halimbawa, kung may 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 papigi o may salo-salo, minsan maaga pa lang yung mga auntie mo na andun na. They don't have to be called. Parang they start helping out dun sa pagluluto, nagkakwentuhan habang nagluluto, everybody brings something. Even after the salo-salo, still naandun pa rin, everybody helps out. So if we can translate that now to the work that we do. Yeah. Una-una, you don't disrupt yung buhay nila sa pag-araw. You work with them while doing your work. Pero you also have to know your boundaries and yung kakayahan mo. Kasi baka naman, maging liability ka lang din ng lipunan. So this is our things that we already know. Pero baka kailangan we have to be reminded. So yeah, earlier this week I was thinking about this a lot. And I think as part of yung ating decolonial project dun sa practices natin sa ating mga disciplines, I think it's good to, nabalikan mo yung nalimot mo sa sarili, yung the idea of remembered self. Ano ba yung inalakan mong practices, and how does that now relate to the work that you do in terms of interaction with communities? Okay, kaya ko I'll be brief to. Napahaba na masyado. So siguro ilang concluding notes lang. I just want to read this little thing that I wrote some time ago. Documentation alone will not arrest the demise of languages. The strategies for revitalization should address the factors identified earlier and include the restoration of dignity and power to the marginalized. Yung linguist-centered na research, where the researcher is solely concerned with a particular academic topic of interest and nothing else, must be questioned. Conversely, yung romantic or rather ideal picture naman of the linguist in the field or the advocate for socio-political change must also be interrogated in terms of the correspondence between the aspirations of the advocate and the needs of the community. The role and the level of involvement of the linguists in the field, especially in vulnerable communities, must constantly be evaluated. Okay, so the careful assessment and identification of needs and threat, linguistic or otherwise, are critical in the crafting of the design, the formation and development of approaches, and the sustainability of collaborative research and revitalization strategies. Despite yung iba-ibang conditions in every field community, it is possible and perhaps imperative to identify certain moral principles that will guide the field linguist or the researcher in the documentation and revitalization of endangered languages. Ito yung mga yun, principles that are scientifically tenable because we have responsibilities to all of these communities. It has to be ethically sound, culturally sensitive, socially just, and inclusive of the community and responsive to their needs. Linguists or yung mga researchers tayo, we need to reframe language documentation efforts in revitalization as part of a wider social justice na framework that recognizes yung interconnected nature of social categories, addresses the layered patterns of oppression, acknowledges intersectionality, and untangles the complexities of the various intermingled factors that lead to social linguistic fragility and language demise. So these are things that I wanted to share for us to think about some more when we do this type of work. Okay. So I'll end there para we have time to discuss kung meron mo kayong mga tanong either dun sa presentation ko or questions from earlier na gusto nyo ibato uli ngayon. Maraming salamat!